Welcome to Spirit Matters, where we explore matters of the spirit with leading experts from across the spiritual spectrum, all designed to enrich and enlarge your wisdom, deepen your joy and peace, and awaken your inner connection to the divine. Here's your host, Philip Goldberg.
Greetings, everyone. This is Phil Goldberg welcoming you to Spirit Matters Reboot, Spirit Matters 2.0. Those of you who have been listening to the Spirit Matters podcast for the last 6 or 7 years know that I co-hosted it with Dennis Ramundi. That iteration has ended, but the archive lives on. And I invite you to explore and listen to the 300 or so interviews we recorded with extraordinary spiritual teachers and experts of various kinds. You'll find it at spiritmatterstalk.com and the YouTube channel of the same name. And it's free. Enjoy all the ones you want to hear. And this new version here at Mind, Body, Spirit FM is also new, and I'm very happy to be starting off this new venture. And I hope all of you listening will send me your feedback, give me your ideas, and subscribe. And today I'm very pleased to have not one, but two exceptional guests. Both are friends and colleagues of mine in an interesting and important venture that we'll be talking about. Jack OKeefe, that's Jack, J-A-C, no K. Jack OKeefe is a spiritual leader, author, trailblazer in the exploration of consciousness, who's been teaching and holding workshops around the world, guiding people in the unfoldment of their own spiritual journey for more than 15 years. Her books include Born to be Free and How to Be a Spiritual Rebel. Rick Archer, whom I confess I've known for about 52 years, when we were both being trained to be teachers of transcendental meditation by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi back in our youth. Rick is the creator and host of the interview show Buddha at the Gas Pump. And ever since that wonderful podcast started in 2009, he's interviewed more than 600 spiritually awakening people, from the well-known to the unknown, from a variety of backgrounds and traditions. Jack and Rick are the co-founders of the Association for Spiritual Integrity, the ASI, and whose mission is to bring high levels of integrity to the culture of spiritual leadership. I am a board member of the ASI and therefore their colleague. So full disclosure, we're in on this together, and I'll be asking questions, the answers to which I already know, but you, the listener, may not. And I'll also be asking questions that I don't know. So let's begin with a little reflection. We all know that there have been instances of unethical behavior, of abuse of power and exploitation on the part of spiritual leaders. This kind of thing has been with us a long time. It's occurred in highly structured organizations like the Catholic Church, as we all know, where accountability and oversight should have been exercised, but was not. And especially since the 1960s, it's occurred in the growing arena of independent spirituality, where teachers and leaders are accountable really to no one but themselves and their students. And that's the sector that ASI is mostly, but not exclusively, focused on. So with that as a short backdrop, let me ask each of you, starting with Jack, why the issue of ethics and integrity on the part of spiritual teachers became important to you personally, and why you decided to start the ASI, and how did it fit in with your own personal spiritual journeys at that time? Jack, do you want to give us some background on your situation?
Yeah, um, you know, the seeds of what the ASI is now was always alive in me somehow. At the age of 15, I went to my religion teacher and said, how can you teach things that you don't have the experience of yourself? And thankfully, she was really accommodating. And at the end of that conversation, I decided I'm going to be a religion teacher. And I'm only going to teach what I know, no dogma that comes from on high, but only from what I know from my own work. And of course, I became a religion teacher, but never worked at it. I qualified and never worked at it. Went through years of atheism. And then, of course, spirituality called me home. And when I became a spiritual teacher myself, I began to notice what my colleagues were and were not doing. And the span of experiences that we had, while we all might point to that inner sanctuary within that is common to everyone, how it was being delivered, the language of it, coupled with there's teaching, the message, there's teaching styles, there's experience in holding space, there's experiences that we are training that we might or might not have in accommodating a traumatized student. And all we need to do is put a shingle outside the door. And so it was sitting with me for many years while I was a spiritual teacher. What can we do in order to be better at what we do? And so at a conference then, some 4 or 5 years ago, I suppose, beginning to meet some colleagues and really noticing we need training, we need peer support. A lot of us feel that there's nobody that we can talk to. Colleagues of mine were saying, there's no therapist I could talk to. Why would I go for therapy? And it's like, well, because you're telling me that your marriage is in pieces, and why wouldn't you go to a marriage counselor? And so this division seems to happen. When we become spiritual leaders, we seem to separate away from regular life. And then that gap is where problems can happen. The needs of the teacher are not being met. So for me, the ASI is about supporting the needs of the teacher so that they can do their work better, so that their own sense of integrity and honesty and upskilling can be met, that there's a place for their own shadow. And we can't see our own shadow. We can't see what we don't know about ourselves. And right now, we live in a culture where the teacher is deemed not to have a shadow. And this is where I feel some dangerous things can happen.
Rick, what about you? What brought you to this situation of starting ASI and seeing the importance of ethics and integrity among teachers?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, you and I have been on a spiritual path for over half a century. And we've experienced a lot of things and seen a lot of things. And you and I both have been in the interviewing business for a number of years. So we've talked to a lot of people. So we have a pretty good oversight of the spiritual landscape. And my own experience and oversight has led me to the conclusion that everyone is a work in progress. Saint Teresa of Avila said, it appears that the Lord himself is on the journey. Jesus, of course, said, be therefore perfect, but I don't know if I've met any perfect people. Don't think I have. And by perfect, I would mean a holistic development where not only consciousness is awake or enlivened to a profound degree, but all the various aspects of the personality, including the behavioral and the ethical, the heart value. And unfortunately, we've seen many examples where someone appeared to have or claimed to have a profound inner illumination, but they were behaving very questionably, if not reprehensibly, with their students or with other people, in various ways, sexual, financial, control issues, all kinds of things. And that can be very disillusioning and harmful to the students. And I also think it's harmful to the teacher himself or herself. So if you look back at the more ancient traditions, they all seem to include ethics as a foundation of the spiritual life, sometimes as the starting block of the spiritual life, if you read Patanjali, for instance. And that's often neglected or ignored in contemporary spirituality. In fact, sometimes people either dismiss all such consideration as relative, belonging to the relative and therefore illusory field, or they use alibis such as, well, I am not the doer, therefore I am not doing this thing that, you're accusing me of. Oh, my body did it, but I'm not doing it because I'm not, that kind of thing. So that's nonsense, in my opinion. And it's not what the great founders and leaders of spiritual traditions would have condoned or approved of. I just think that if we really are serious about this spiritual development business, then we owe it to ourselves, and if we have students, to our students, to include a vigilance or a diligence about our own behavior, so as to set an example for others, and so as to safeguard our own development and our efficacy as teachers, if we're a teacher.
In my experience, one of the, you could say, excuses or rationale when a teacher's behavior is exposed that seems to be unethical and hurtful, usually it's sexual. Often
Usually it's men.
Also, yes, and often it's financial, but most of the attention-getting ones and the most hurtful are sexual exploitation. Often it's said, well, the teacher is on such an exalted plane of consciousness, so attuned, so enlightened, so awakened, and so attuned to the laws of the universe, to cosmic energy and divine will, that what might appear on the superficial level to be misbehavior is really on a spiritual level of benefit to the people involved. And therefore, the teacher is doing good in what may be seen to be misbehavior. I assume both of you have seen and heard of such things. I'd love to hear each of your takes on it.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, you want to go first?
Yeah, if that were true, that it was always for the students' highest good, then last week I heard of a student who was doing yoga teacher training, and she asked the trainer, so if a spiritual teacher or a guru wants to have sex with me, I'm supposed to do that for my own good, aren't I? That's what she asked. In this contemporary society, that belief is there, that it's all for my own good, that they are faultless. And we're entering this, interesting phase of where integration of these finer levels of consciousness have to in some way make sense with our humanness. And traditionally, if you want to live in an ashram, if you want to pull away from regular life, and if you take a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience, that will give you a way to stay out of harm's way. But it does not address the Pandora's box that is wide open for contemporary teachers. And I'm not sure that all the scriptures, even touched what contemporary life is like. I think there is a place for new guidelines of codes of behavior and how to integrate these fine, refined levels of consciousness with how we show up as human beings. And we're responsible for both. And I where I'm at right now, I suppose in my own evolution, I do feel that we're not spiritually mature enough if we're not able to hold those refined absorption in God energy and our own shadow at the same time. Somehow we praise those who are absorbed in God and want to deify and see them as they can do no harm. And that blind spot, that is a blind spot in all our cultures, Rick said earlier about I've never seen a perfect human being. There aren't any. There can't be, because the evolution of our humanity would stop. It would reach an end point. And it can't, because we have this evolution built into creation itself. There would be constant evolution. Imperfection is the perfection of our humanness, and having space for the growth of how do we have these fine levels of consciousness and our humanness embodied and be responsible for both. And this is the calling, I think, of the contemporary spiritual leader.
Rick, did you ever buy into that sort of rationale that I discussed when you heard of misbehaving gurus and the like? Did you ever think, well, on some level, it must be perfect and meant to be and right, because that by definition, everything the guru does fits into that category?
A little bit, maybe. I mean, our own teacher used to speak of spontaneous right action. He said that once you were in a state of cosmic consciousness or higher, you couldn't make a mistake. You were completely in line with nature's intelligence. And, but, I just don't buy it anymore. I think that there's a quote from the Buddhist sage Padmasambhava. He said that although my awareness is as vast as the sky, my attention to karma is as fine as a grain of barley flour. And so what he was saying essentially was, hey, I may be really cosmic here, but I'm really careful about the way I behave, So too bad we can't get him on the board of the ASI. But,
be perfect.
Yeah. But, and I've often, ever since we started the ASI, I've always thought, well, the students are really the ones who need to hold the teacher's feet to the fire, and in some way. And if students are not empowered or confident in their own understanding, then they're going to sit there and the teacher is going to go farther and farther off the rails, not only sexual things, but blatant, excessive alcoholism and all kinds of other things that we've seen. And the student is just going to say, well, this guy is supposed to be enlightened and I'm not, therefore who am I to judge? And I'll just sort of go along with this. But I think if students were more mature in their understanding, they would vote with their feet and walk out of there or call the teacher on it or something. I just don't buy into the crazy wisdom alibi for egregious behavior.
In the spiritual communities where teachers are independent and often self-anointed, they have no institution, no lineage, no hierarchy to answer to, no one to hold their feet to the fire, keep an eye on them, lend support and counsel when needed, and so forth. We know that where it does exist, it's not necessarily always the answer, because as we've seen with the Catholic Church, but and other spiritual institutions, but especially where there is no institutional framework, What you're saying, it sounds like, is that the individual community, even if it's guru-led and hierarchical and top-down, that students should be empowered to hold teachers accountable. There's often peer pressure against that. There's often, in spiritual communities, the sense that if you raise an objection to something, or even a doubt about the teacher's status, or think the teacher might have said something mistaken, you could be ostracized. How do we counter that?
Let me just make a real quick comment before Jack takes over on this. You just wrote an autobiography of Yogananda, and you remember that
a biography.
A biography. I'm sorry. Yeah, remember that bit in his autobiography where he first met Sri Yukteswar, and I think he was resting with his head on Sri Yukteswar's lap, or vice versa. And Sri Yukteswar said to Yogananda, if I ever seem to be falling from my God consciousness state, please call me on it. Bring it to my attention. I just wanted to throw that in. And then I think Jack could take it from here, because she has lots of great things to say about peer support groups and stuff like that.
I think we have to address teachers as well as students' autonomy. If we just focus on building the autonomy of students, then the teachers' need for training and education and giving them the tools to address their own needs outside of their workplace, where they're going to get that training? How is that shift going to happen? And by, upgrading, I suppose, booting up our own skill set, our own interpersonal skills, our own understanding about the role of being a spiritual leader and the amount of responsibility that we have. If we upgrade that, like in one teacher, we're looking at maybe a couple of thousand students. And I see a huge multiplier effect in working with the teachers, but there's huge potency to be had in working with the student body also. And we're one as yet small fledgling organization. What's obvious is there is a lot of work to be done. There is a transformation of this culture that needs to go from a hierarchical, the guru can do no harm, to a we space, to where our shared humanity is respectfully honored, teacher, student alike, and where the role of being a spiritual leader comes with a certain ethical code. And that's what led us then to drawing up this code of ethics with 25, 26 points of good practice. Interestingly enough, though, teachers go, yep, because they all sound great, do no harm and be open to feedback. Very easy to say, of course I do that. And rarely do we have a teacher saying, I don't know how to do that. And so there's an assumption that they're doing fine. But actually, when we have an opportunity for students to file a complaint against teacher, with the code being in the middle, so that there's a clearly factual basis for the complaint, we find that the different lens of perception that a teacher comes from is miles apart from what happened in the reality. The impact of their work seems not to be within their purview. And that to me is a little bit alarming, is that we've lost track of the impact. So because we don't have original agreements, or we don't hear the needs of the student in like they might in other organizations or agreements where there is a contract, we don't operate in that way. So it's very easy, if you're that far apart from this where the student is really at, and you're just delivering teachings, it's very easy to imagine that everything that the student says is about their ego, is something for them to learn. And we seem to have lost this skill. It's like, hey, bring your own humanness in. How can you upgrade? What skills do you need as a spiritual leader in order to be able to have your humanness meet the humanness and to learn from them? And what can you learn about yourself from your student?
Don't we have some kind of feedback form that we've developed in the ASI to be handed out on retreats and things like that?
Yeah.
I wonder how many teachers have used that.
3 the last time I checked,
Okay.
out of 400 odd.
I want to get to some of the specifics of the ethical code that we came up with, but before I do, um, do you think um, students, spiritual seekers, at least at certain stages of their own development, feed into the problem because of their own need to deify or to project onto a spiritual teacher levels of perfection that are, shall we say, unrealistic? A tendency to build pedestals to put the teacher on that are impossibly high. I get that. That's part of the situation, so that very often a spiritual teacher finds him or herself being elevated in the eyes of a student and perhaps others, and that can go to one's head. That can be very intoxicating. Has it ever happened to you, Jack? You have personal students.
Yes.
And what do you do when that? I mean, I remember just when I was teaching retreats and stuff that people would make assumptions about my spiritual stature. And I'd be thinking, oh God, please don't do that to me. But, and I would laugh about it, privately,
Yes.
but it is intoxicating, or it can be.
Yes.
How do you react when you see that happening around you? And what would you recommend to other teachers?
Yeah. I'm going to generalize here. I see that there are primarily 2 things going on for the student. There's the systemic model that of royalty or the military or the government or the CEO is in charge, and they are, the buck stops there. And so that hierarchical structure that has been around for a couple of thousand years is systemic, and it's in all of our brains, that the person at the top knows more than I ever will because I'm further down the pecking order. And a spirituality falls into that too. So there lies one problem. And the other primal thing, I think, is when there is a need for the student to resolve something with a parent, when their own psychology is involved, then very often there is a projection of a childlike need on the parent. They need to be loved, accepted, they can't see any wrong. And so this blinds their vision too. I'm generalizing, but these are the 2 most dominant things. I more than once I have gone into a student's home because I'm giving a retreat nearby, and they're saying, "Oh, come around for dinner," or something like this happens. And I've seen altars where my photograph is in the center, beside, I don't know, the Virgin Mary and the Buddha statue and all of that, And somehow I find my way around of saying, "Can you put a mirror up there? Could you take down my frame and put a beautiful photograph of yourself into that frame instead?" And it takes some time to change the viewpoint of the student so that they understand, that this interim altar is actually so that you're on the altar. This is about you. And not every teacher gives that to the student. Not every teacher hands it back to the student, because the student has to be mature enough to say, "Oh, I'm looking for what I am. I'm looking for something that's inside me, and I need to run it through a teacher for a while." So I would love if teachers explained that dynamic to students. But you're right, Phil. What happens is like, "Oh, this is potent. It gives you energy. It helps you to transmit more Shakti." There are all kinds of benefits of soaking up that adoration that is used and abused, and it's a misuse of power. It's an abuse of power in many cases. That happens for teachers.
You have a picture of Anandamoy Ma behind you.
I do.
If she were to come to your house, if she were to incarnate and come to your house and say, "Jack, don't put a picture of me up there," how
Yes.
would you be okay? How would you reply? Would you love her even more?
I would. I would. I would. I would say, good for you. And it's, it's it doesn't mean anything. These are just nice photographs of beings that helped me along the way. But there is zero adoration, or the sense of equality overrides all levels of differences.
And is it possible, before Rick, just let me throw this in, and you can make this part of your response, the answer. Is it possible to have great respect and reverence for a spiritual teacher and gratitude for somebody who helped you, and at the same time draw a line between that and deification? And in fact, in my case, I have come to look back on some of the teachers that I revered to a ridiculous extent, and discovering their humanness made me kind of like them even more. I don't hold them to be perfect, because there is, as we said, no such thing. And the humanness has its own charm, and the lack of perfection, and just you can respect them the same way you respect a great artist or a great athlete, and hold them in the highest esteem without it flipping over into that kind of dependency or something. Rick, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, well, the distinction between athletics or some field like that and spirituality is that bhakti, or devotion, is a time-honored component of spirituality, and particularly in a culture like India or someplace. But some teachers are considered worthy of reverence, and if I were a physics student and I could have Albert Einstein as my teacher, I would have great respect and admiration for him, but I wouldn't revere him in some kind of holy way. But in the field of spirituality, people do that, because a spiritual teacher is supposed to be more than a great intellect. He or she is supposed to be the embodiment of the divine, like Anandamaima.
And there's said to be spiritual value in having that worshipful attitude.
Yes, it cultures the heart and so on. So, I mean, someone like Anandamaima or the others would want all of his or her students to rise to their level and to realize the divine as fully as they had realized it. But the reason we go to such people in the first place is that we recognize that they've got something that we may intrinsically have but haven't realized yet, and it's going to benefit us from being in their presence and working with them. Now, like you said in the beginning of your question, Phil, it takes a great deal of maturity to be the object of such reverence and not let it go to your head. And unfortunately, more often than not, perhaps it does go to teachers' heads, and they get all carried away, and problems ensue. So I'm just dancing around this because I don't see it as a cut and dried thing. There's a place for devotion. There's a place for having a reverential attitude toward people who are worthy of that, but it's also a bit of a sticky wicket. It can cause problems if either from the student's side there's blind reverence, and or from the teacher's side there's some shreds of ego that get inflated as a result of that appreciation.
When an ethical breach occurs in spiritual circles, in my experience, there's a range of reactions that the spiritual community goes through. On the one extreme, this couldn't happen. Our teacher is above all such things. It must be a mistake. Or if it did happen, there's a good spiritual reason for it. And if it's of benefit to us all, it's a teaching. And on the other extreme, I've seen people get so upset that they throw the baby out with the bathwater and abandon all of their spiritual pursuits and, plunge headlong back into sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or whatever they're into, and just discard them all. When something occurs what would be a healthy reaction on the part of a student community, and how can ASI help?
You take it, Jack.
Oh, every case that we've that has been brought to our attention so far has been slightly different. So it's tricky to for us to even find a response where these different stories can be met adequately. Gosh, I don't know. It's so wide a question. Rick, do you wanna talk?
Yeah, sure. I would say that, the way I have dealt with it was to first become a little cynical, and then to just expose myself to as much information about it as possible, and to have a nuanced attitude, because in my own case, I derived great spiritual benefit from my primary teacher in this life, and literally my life was saved as a result, of learning to meditate and practicing it regularly. I was heading down the wrong path, but I'm not blind to certain things which I don't want to enumerate that seem inappropriate to me, and so I just have to sort of acknowledge the humanity of the man, which it means some warts, some flaws, some shortcomings, some blind spots, and at the same time appreciate, the gift. Kind of like Babe Ruth, he swung for the fences, he struck out a lot, but he hit more home runs than anybody.
And misbehaved more than anybody.
And he did.
He
could eat
case.
like 50 hot dogs or something.
But we don't held people like him to such high standards.
True.
And no.
Yeah.
Let's look at the sort of centerpiece of the Association for Spiritual Integrity is the what we call the Honor Code of Ethics and Good Practice. There's a list of principles for individuals and another for communities. I got involved when there was a draft of this, and I, just in full disclosure, helped to draft the current version. Given that there's not a disclaimer, but an acknowledgement at the bottom of the code that it's a work in progress and will be reassessed and revised on occasion as we learn things and all that. Before going into some of the specifics, set the table when you two were beginning the ASI. What was the impetus for saying we should have a code? We should have a list of principles for spiritual teachers to agree to and do their best to live up to. Every spiritual tradition has codes of behavior and things to do and things not to do. Why the need for this? What was the impetus?
Go ahead, Jack.
It's a little bit like the Wild West, without any guidelines for spiritual leaders, specifically spiritual leaders who mightn't have fully integrated their awakening, spiritual leaders who are so absorbed in God that they have ignored their human responsibilities.
They're so absorbed in themselves. But anyway, continue.
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course.
You were telling me the other day that some high percentage of spiritual teachers are considered, narcissistic. That's right. There's a narcissist specialist that I'm watching his work, and I was talking to him about, can we overlap spiritual leaders with narcissism? Have you ever looked at it? And he said, my percentage is 15%. That 15% of spiritual leaders would have narcissistic personality disorder. That's where his research is taking him.
And he said, more than any profession, it's attractive because you get this endless stream of attention by virtue of the fact of what you set yourself up to be, a spiritual teacher, claiming to have something that you may or may not have. You might have the concept of it, but you actually mightn't have made the shifts in order to sustain it. There are a lot of spiritual teachers who turn it on when they're working, but their own lives are not aligned at all. And this misalignment, somehow personally, it makes my stomach churn when we don't walk our talk. And so what could we do to bring people into the importance of walking their talk, and at the same time respecting students and upgrading their own skills, and maybe making them a little bit more conscious of how they are teaching and treating others. And so a code of ethics seemed to be the obvious place where we could explore just, this is what to watch, this is what to watch for, this is what to watch for. And it will keep you away from being an abusive teacher. But we are within a community where, like, I can do no harm because I have read in so many scriptures that my awakening says that all of my action is right action, it's pure action. And there we are, with the immature, fundamental, misinterpretation of scripture. In the absence of training, in the absence of a lineage, in the absence of mentorship, harm will happen. Harm really can happen. So the code of ethics was like, hey, let's try and get our poop together, like, let's try and line up somehow to be respectful of others and to do no harm. Let's start there.
Yeah.
And while it seemed like a really basic list to me personally when we were doing it, I now see that, oh my God, teachers don't even realize that they're not adhering to the code. They don't even realize that they're breaching the code all over the place. There's that little self-reflection in the human part. There's that little attention placed on their own human growth. No matter what we offer or we set up or we investigate in the ASI, I find myself going, okay, peel it back another step. You've made more assumptions, Jack. You've made more assumptions. Peel it back another step. So we're looking at like initiatives like peer support so that we can show spiritual teachers there are places where you can talk safely to other spiritual teachers and drop the role of being a leader. Drop all of that. And who are you without your role? Who are you? And that's what the peer support initiative is about. There's a lot to do.
Yeah. Can I add a quick thing, Phil?
Please.
Maybe we should have said this in the beginning, and we often have said this in ASI presentations at the SAN conference and stuff, but we are not the morality police. You hear that phrase in the news because of what's happening in Iran. And, we want to dispel the notion from the outset that we consider ourselves to have any authority or, control over what teachers do or anything like that. We don't want that. But all we're trying to do is kind of define a standard that everyone can mutually agree upon. And most of it is common sense. And we spent a lot of time hashing over this code of ethics before it reached its current form, just because otherwise people are saying, well, what are you talking about exactly? And it needs to be, we want to popularize a common sense notion of what is appropriate for a spiritual teacher to do and not to do. And you'd think it would be obvious, but judging from all the train wrecks that have occurred in contemporary spirituality, it apparently isn't. So that's what we're trying to contribute, is just to set a standard, or reasonable expectations that spiritual teachers should be expected to abide by.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Rick. I was going to bring up this notion, and we've already run into people who assume that we're some kind of enforcement organization and that holds spiritual teachers accountable, like the AMA holds doctors accountable for proper behavior and all that. We're not that. We're not a judicial system or a law enforcement.
Nor do we ever want to be.
Or I certainly wouldn't want to be in that position. At the same time, we're encouraging ethical behavior and ethical standards, some of which, when you look at it, I could see somebody saying, well, of course, that's obvious. Right from the beginning, it says, the first principle is, it all begins with as spiritual teachers we commit to. And the first one is holding ourselves to the highest standards of ethics, right behavior, and professional competency, as commonly recognized by our peers. Now, some people will say, I have no peers. I'm not
Grand
that I'm,
poobah.
yeah, I'm a lone ranger. I don't belong to a community. I'm an awakened spiritual teacher. I have access to this special knowledge. And who are these peers?
And if they don't say it, they often behave that way.
Yeah. So that's one. And let's look at some of them. Respecting the rights, dignity, and safety of all students and fellow practitioners. That would seem like something that's almost a gimme. It's like, oh, well, of course I'll sign on to that one. But I find when I look at these things, and I think, Jack, you alluded to this, some of the points that would seem to be obvious are often not necessarily easy to live up to, or that there's nuance there where people might be blind to not, I wouldn't go as far as saying violation of, but to not holding the highest level of interpretation of that. Treating students' questions, concerns, doubts, and experiences with respect, never trivializing or dismissing their inquiries. That's an easy one to violate, because people
and each time you read one of these, specific instances flash in my mind of this teacher or that teacher, doing these things
you've heard have happened.
Yes, right.
Me too. Yeah.
Give me an example without naming names.
Yeah, without naming names. Well, one of our board members, who I won't also name, recently was involved in a situation where she and some people she knew were in a spiritual community for a visit, and there was such a devaluation of anybody's free will or initiative that you couldn't even suggest like what to put in the salad if you happen to be working in the kitchen, because you're not supposed to think your own thoughts here. We get all our inspirations from our enlightened teacher, and it got to the point where she had a medical situation that was being ignored because she was thinking too many of her own thoughts, and they wouldn't attend to it. I know that's just an example.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, yeah.
There are also further down. Jack, did you want to add something to that?
I think the one about, it's very nuanced to be respectful of our students' opinions and inquiries. Because our job is to assess in that moment if it's coming from a spiritual place, therefore there's an opportunity to work with something with the student, or if it's actually feedback on this human level. And we default, when we have the hat of teacher on and we're sitting at the top of the room, we will default to this is an opportunity for them to grow. And we don't have that pause yet within our own psyches as a norm. And that's what that points to. Is like, take on board that in the moment you have to be able to take off the hat of teacher and put on human being. This person is paying for and giving their time to learn something. What really are they talking about? What are they really talking about as human beings? And we tend to not do that. we make assumptions and respond and stay in our role.
And I find in my experience that often I would advise teachers to go the extra mile and encourage it and give explicit permission to students to do it. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in India and I heard about a Western guru who had some following. And so I took advantage of my role in life as an author and said, I'd like to interview her. It was a female teacher. And they said, okay, here, you can come for 20 minutes. And when I sat with her and started asking questions, we had such a good time that it went on for an hour. And when I left, I saw outside the door all of her devotees waiting for her because she was late. And they looked at me like, who is this guy who our guru gave all this time to? And we overheard them laughing and telling stories. He must be something else. And I thought, this is weird. So I went back to one of their satsangs a day later. And because she had told me this was so much fun because no one talks to me like a real human being anymore. And I get there and everybody is, quiet and reverential and respectful. And she points at me sitting in the back and she says, see that man? We had a conversation yesterday and he asked me really hard questions. Why don't any of you ask me hard questions? I know you're thinking of them. What are you afraid of? And it blew everybody's mind. They suddenly were being given permission to do something they thought would be inappropriate in that context. And I'll never forget that moment. Of course, then everybody wanted to treat me like I was special. So I left. But there's that too. There's self-censorship sometimes on the part of students, isn't there? It's a two-way thing. Yeah. So all of you listening, if you're part of ask your teacher tough questions. That could be a test of their own humility and integrity and dedication to your own growth. Some of the items in the code, and we don't have time to go into it all, but I would encourage all the listeners to go to the ASI website, which is spiritual-integrity.org. And the ethical code would be spiritual-integrity.org/ethics. And take a look at the code. We'd love to have your feedback, what you think of it. If you think there's anything off or missing, please let us know. Some of the ones get down to nitty-gritty stuff. Never manipulating, exploiting, or deceiving a student to satisfy our personal aspirations, needs, or desires. Never abusing the trust of students to obtain sexual gratification, money, free labor, or other personal benefits. Being particularly mindful of sexual boundaries with students and honoring them at all times. And I can see spiritual teachers saying, do I have to sign on to that one? Because there are benefits to being a spiritual teacher and to being exalted in that capacity. So the question is, given those standards and the many and growing number of people who are becoming members and agreeing to uphold those standards, I could see somebody listening to us and saying, the ones who need it most won't sign on. And what do we do with about teachers who are intent or even may even justify what would look like unethical behavior on the grounds that they're above all this and everything they do is for their students' sake, or who might just say, hey, it's a fringe benefit. I'm helping them. And, if I want to have some fun, why not? If it's consenting adults and all that sort of stuff. So what do we do about when people issue a complaint to the ASI, and we have a mechanism for dealing with people's complaints? There's a procedure if the person in question, a teacher, is a member and has therefore agreed to those principles, and those who are not members. What can we advise people where it's so far out of our jurisdiction that we can't personally intervene or help in any way? What advice do we have before we close for students?
One of my dreams is that students would ask a teacher, do you have a system of feedback? Do you have a grievance process? Can I see the code of ethics that protects both you and us before I begin to work with you? Wouldn't that be just beautiful if students would ask teachers to have that, so that the pressure can come from students to bring teachers' attention there?
And if the ASI grows and reaches a certain critical mass, maybe it will be more common for students to ask such a thing. It'll be like the good housekeeping seal of approval. This product doesn't have the good housekeeping seal of approval. Why not? What's going on?
Yes. Yeah, and I think if the critical mass does happen, I believe it can. I believe there's enough unrest out there and a demand for something better. And if we can respond to that and keep our ear to the ground to really be in tune with how society is changing, and to be part of that wave, then those who want to behave better will pull away from those who are left in the old model. That might take 10 years.
Very good.
Why not?
Any final words from either of you before we sign off?
Well, I think it's just delightful that you and I are so in touch with one another after all these years. It's really kind of gratifying to me, Phil, and I have great respect for what you've been doing all these years, and it's also really a joy to be involved with Jack on an ongoing basis, and all the other people in the ASI. Met some really delightful characters through this, and we're all, there's that Indian saying, "The world is my family," Vasudev Kutumbakam, or something like that. So
yes, you're close.
Yeah, something like that. So I flunked Sanskrit 101. So anyway, it's just nice to have this larger spiritual family and this particular subset of it that we've created with the ASI.
Thank you, Rick. Jack, any final words for our listeners without flattering Rick and me?
If there is a listener who feels passionate deep in their being about this topic, I'd like them to reach out. Maybe they can be a multiplier effect or an advocate, or maybe they can, if they're a teacher or a student, there are steps we can take in order to shift the paradigm of spiritual leadership. This is not beyond reach. We can do this, but we need help. We need to help each other to do it. So come on board.
Thank you. And listeners, you can find out more about Jack and her work at jackokeefe.com. That's JAC-OKEEFFE.com. And Rick and his wonderful show, Buddha at the Gas Pump, you can find at the acronym batgap.com. And you can find me, not just here, but my website, philipgoldberg.com. I would invite you to explore the website and my books and To the extent that I remember to update the website, my events and ongoing projects. And please click the contact me, and you can get on my mailing list. And I promise you infrequent updates about interesting events and worthwhile resources, as opposed to annoying daily mailings. And so subscribe to my mailing list, and subscribe, please, to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time on Spirit Matters. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.